Welcome back to another episode of Macabre Manuscripts. I'm your horror hostess, Lorelei. Today is going to be a little different because instead of doing a King novel, we are doing our first of his short story anthologies. We're going to be talking about Night Shift. So what I think we're going to do this time is just hit each story one by one. I'll do the summary and my thoughts, and then we'll just go ahead and go on till the next story. We'll see how long the video runs. My plan is to get 10 done this week and 10 done in the next video. The next video will be delayed by a week because I have grown-up stuff I have to take care of next week. My sister's getting married. Life. Anyway. So we'll do the first 10 stories in the book this week. Hopefully we'll see how it goes with time. And at the end of the King portion of the video, I will go ahead and rank my top I'll rank from 1 through 10, which one my favorite to my least favorite. In case I haven't said it before, I do encourage people to go out and read this stuff yourself. Form your own opinions. I have strong opinions. That's why I made a YouTube channel. Also, I was bored and had too much time on my hands. But that's beside the point. Anyway, I've done my best to include the trigger warnings for each story, and I guess let's just get into it. We are going to get started with Jerusalem's Lot. Okay, so for Salem's Lot, I'm going to say the trigger warnings we should watch out for here are going to be suicide, the undead, curses, mass disappearances. Think like Roanoke. That's the right one? I think that's the right one. That one's actual history. Anyway, yeah, but if that kind of stuff freaks you out, probably don't. The summary portion. In this tale, in the year 1850, we follow our protagonist, Charles Boone, with an E, and this will be important later, and his friend Calvin McCann. They arrive at Chapelwaite, the ancestral home of the Boone family, left abandoned after the suicide of Charles's cousin Stephen. Stephen and Charles were estranged because there was a fight between Charles' grandfather, Robert, and his brother, Stephen's grandfather, Philip. What we're initially told is the brothers got into a fight over some papers. Robert left for Massachusetts, and Philip stayed in Chapelwaite and lived there, raised a family, handed the house down as we went along. Cal tells Charles, "What was said, sir, was that anyone who would live in Chapelwaite must be either a lunatic or run the risk of becoming one." So that's encouraging, right? That's good. That's cool. That seems fine. Calvin says that when he goes to speak to the woodcutter who he is trying to get deliveries from, that the man said he would send his sons with the wood in the good light of day and by the sea road. Calvin, apparently misreading my bemusement for distress, hastened to say that the man reeked of cheap whiskey, and that he had then lapsed into some kind of nonsense about a deserted village and cousin Stephen's relations and worms. Calvin finished his business with one of Thompson's boys, and they got the deliveries scheduled. The locals just aren't super excited about them being there. Also, of note is that the description we get of the house involves some very eclectic decor, and more importantly, an apparent rat problem, except that still, I have noted neither holes nor droppings. Odd. Some women come in to clean for the two men, and Charles speaks to one of them, Mrs. Cloris, who tells him the house is bad and has been since Philip and Robert's falling out. Later that night, Calvin comes to tell Charles he's found a map hidden in the library leading to the nearby abandoned town of Jerusalem's Lot. The next day, the pair decides to not mind their own damn business and go to the lot. For clarification, it's not called the lot anywhere in the story. I just don't want to keep saying Jerusalem's Lot over and over again. Jerusalem's Lot is a lot of words, so I'm just going to call it the lot, because that's what it is. That's what Salem's Lot is. That's what this is. Salem's Lot is just Jerusalem's Lot. in case I forgot to specify that in the Salem's Lot video. Anyway, the next day, the pair decides to not mind their own business and go to the lot. They find a pristine but abandoned town that has experienced no change except what weather would cause. They go through town to the church, where once the door is opened and they get hit with the smell from inside, Charles says that he believes there are spiritually noxious places, buildings where milk of the cosmos has become sour and rancid. This church is such a place, I would swear to it. You know, cool stuff. Maybe don't go poking around abandoned towns. No, okay, you guys do you. They find a painting in the entry described as a grotesque travesty of Madonna and Child, and when they enter the church proper, the large gold cross hanging at the front is inverted. On the pulpit is a book. Charles touches it and has a hallucination of chanting, but also hears something turn beneath his feet. So just because now I don't remember if I mentioned it, the story is told mostly through letters written to Charles' friend Bones and through some journal entries from Calvin that we haven't gotten to yet. So I've kind of tried to break up between letters, but once we hit Calvin's journal, it gets a little bit more all over the place. In his next letter, Charles tells Bones that in the week since visiting the lot, he and Calvin have become convinced it isn't rats in the walls of Chapel Waite. However, they have been unable to find any hidden passageways that would allow the movement of people or larger animals, that type of thing. Charles goes into town because their wood delivery never shows up and is turned away by the woodcutter with much hostility. He goes to speak with the cleaning woman who had told him the house was bad. She says the town has had many strange omens in the last week. After Charles tells her he's been to the lot and touched the book, she relents and tells him the reason his grandfather Robert and great-uncle Philip had their falling out was because Robert attempted to take a book from Philip. That book is the book that was sitting on the pulpit of the church in Jerusalem's Lot. This is where we start to go between letters from Charles to Bones and entries from a journal kept by Calvin. Calvin digs around and finds a locked and coded book in the library and eventually finds a bundle of papers with the information of how the code works. When the journal is translated, we find it belonged to Robert. We learn the following from the journal and from Charles's conversation with the cleaning lady. Jerusalem's Lot was founded in 1710 by Charles Boone. Boone with no E, B-O-O-N, that spells Boone. That's a Stand reference. Boone's not, the B-O-O-N thing is. I'm being silly, which is impressive because I'm very tired today. Anyway, so James Boone, which is the same as Charles' last name, except Charles' last name has an E. So B-O-O-N, James Boone, Charles, B-O-O-N-E. Boone. Preacher's Corner, the town Charles and Calvin have been getting supplies from, was built in 1741. Chapel Waite was built by Robert and Philip in 1782. Philip became fascinated with James Boone's town of Jerusalem's Lot, which was essentially a cult. Basically, the whole town worshipped James Boone and feared his preaching and him just in general. By the time Robert and Philip got there, it appeared most, if not all, of the lot was made up of inbred progeny of Boone, who one of the characters estimated must have been around 100 years old when Robert and Philip arrived. I think Robert was the one that kind of no, it would have had to be somebody else a little bit later. Anyway, doesn't matter. In 1789, Philip is baptized into Boone's church. Robert, horrified. Philip asks Robert to reach out to a connection he has about a book. Robert, after having Philip swear he'll renounce his baptism from Boone's church if Robert does this for him, like a liar, reaches out about the book. When they receive the book, Philip, shocking no one, laughs in Robert's face when Robert reminds him of his promise and takes the book immediately to James Boone. On October 31st, 1789, sometime after Robert attempted to steal the book back from Philip, failed, and moved to Massachusetts, where he began his own family. Philip and the entire population of Jerusalem's lot vanished. Charles speculates that his family are descendants of James Boone. Someone must have escaped the cult or gotten carried out, something, and went on to father the Boone with an E line. But their blood summoned Robert and Philip back to the lot, and now it has brought Charles back to the lot. Charles and Calvin finally investigate the cellar, finding 2 of Charles' relatives, Marcella and Randolph, who are undead. The story we were told earlier is Marcella had taken a fall down the cellar stairs and died. Her father, Randolph, had hung himself out of grief and/or maybe guilt for the stairs not being safe or not watching his daughter close enough. I don't remember how old she was. The 2 mortals escape back upstairs and Charles falls unconscious. He's passed out for, I think, a couple of days this time. While he is passed out, Calvin boards up the entry to the cellar so that the undead can't get into the actual house through that means. Calvin and Charles go back to Salem's Lot, because why not? Charles attempts to get the book to burn it, but is caught up in another hallucination and begins chanting, summoning a thing beneath the earth of the church, a worm-like eldritch being a la H.P. Lovecraft. The thing gets distracted and attacks Calvin, and Charles manages to burn the copy of the book. There are 4 elsewhere out in the world, but only this one in or around Jerusalem's Lot that we're aware of. And Charles escapes back to the house, but in grief at the loss of his friend and the horror at the thing in the church in Jerusalem's Lot, he kills himself because he is the last of the Boone family line. Or is he? The last letter in the story is a new character. He writes that Charles went mad and killed Calvin himself, and that all his ramblings are the same. Madness brought on by his long illness, and all of Calvin's writing were clever forgeries. We find out the man behind this letter is the child of a bastard relative that Charles did not know about, James Robert Boone, who now plans to take up residence in Chapelwaite. He says there is still a serious rat problem. James's letter is dated October 2nd, the same month and day as Charles' first letter, but the year is 1971. As for my thoughts, I didn't think we were going to end up back at the lot so soon, but also, you ever get proved wrong so hard it feels a little personal? Have I ever met Stephen King? No. Will I ever meet Stephen King? Unfortunately, probably not. But I feel a little attacked. I'm kidding. I went on a whole side quest in the Salem's Lot episode about, oh no, the town's not an evil place, it's just the Marston house. Nope. Whole town. Super evil. Super cursed. Super bad. The only thing we don't have, and I believe there's another story in Night Shift, but I think it is an epilogue to Salem's Lot, not another prologue, is how Salem's Lot became an active town again. There are no Boones that I can recall or in my names list in the novel, but I think we can safely say the Marston house and Chapelwaite are the same house. I'd say that also means the churches, the one Charles meets the Eldritch Beast in, and the one where Father Donald Callahan preaches, are one and the same. Though I'm sure it was fixed up with the correct iconography before it started being used as a Catholic church. Also, I realized I kind of skimmed over what happened to Father Callahan in Salem's Lot. Barlow, after Callahan's faith fails him, makes Callahan drink some of Barlow's blood. This curses him but does not turn him into a vampire, which is why Callahan can't enter his church after the fight. Anyway, Jerusalem's Lot, very good story, kept my interest. These are obviously shorter stories, so the pace is faster than what we see with the novels, but it also doesn't feel super rushed. I think the letter style format works better in short stories. I would also say that I am definitely more invested in Salem's Lot than I was expecting to be, so I'm looking forward to the other story in Night Shift that relates to it. I think it's the last one. So, we have a little more backstory on Salem's Lot. we have some shenanigans, but we are going to step away from Jerusalem's Lot for the moment, and we are going to go into Graveyard Shift. Our second tale in Night Shift is going to be Graveyard Shift. Trigger warnings are rats, claustrophobia, nyctophobia. I think that's everything, just in case, because I think I forgot to say it for Jerusalem's Lot. If you've read these stories and you know any other trigger warnings, please put them in the comments. I would really appreciate it, and I'm sure other people would too. Summary for Graveyard Shift is Hall, a wandering jack of all trades, is working a picker machine in Gates Falls, Maine one night when his foreman, Warwick, comes and asks if he wants to do some overtime helping clean out the sub-basement of the building. He'll make some extra money an hour on top of his normal pay. He's also going to get double pay for 4th of July. Hall and a group of other employees take Warwick up on the offer, but realize they won't just be contending with years of random office junk that's been shoved down there. They're also contending with rats. Not only are the rats huge, but they've been left alone for so long they have no fear of humans. Even after 4 employees are bitten, the foreman keeps badgering the others that they're not going to get the work done when they're meant to, and just overall being an asshole. Hall, who Warwick calls college boy like it's an insult, does some research and realizes that there's yet another level below where they're working, which must be where the rats are coming from. They come across a trapdoor in Hall after telling Warwick about zoning codes he's breaking by ignoring this issue, demands Warwick go down with him to investigate. Another employee goes down with them but is quickly disturbed by the amount of rats and goes back upstairs. Hall, tired of how Warwick has treated him and the other employees, forces Warwick deeper and deeper into the strange area. The further they go, the larger the rats get. There's also deformed bats. Finally, the pair comes upon deformed rats 3 feet tall and missing their back legs. They also find a drop-off. Warwick demands they leave because the rats are chewing through the high-powered water hose Hall has been dragging toward the rats off. When Warwick attempts to leave, Hall blasts him with the hose, making him fall into a hole where he's quickly overtaken by the rats. Hall leaves Warwick to his fate and makes it part of the way back when the rats have damaged the hose enough that the water is no longer a danger to them and they take Hall down as well. Our story ends with the other employees going down through the trapdoor to try to find Hall and Warwick. My main thought here is they can't all be winners. I didn't get any strong indication of how or why or where this might be connected to the Kingverse, but I'm sure it is. Our best working detail is that it takes place in the town of Gates Falls, which is not, at least on our beam, an actual town in Maine. As for the story itself, or if it is, Google failed me. Hard. 'Cause I looked. Anyway, as for the story itself, this one's gonna be meh for me. I completely understand why this is gonna freak some people out. Doesn't really do anything to me. For me. I'm gonna take a line from Chicago here and say he had it coming for the boss. Don't treat your employees like shit. They're people. We shouldn't have to tell people this, but we very much still do. I got nothing. It's not one that particularly appeals to me. We're going to go ahead and move on to Night Surf. Trigger warnings for Night Surf are going to be disease, mass death, someone being burned alive, and emotional abuse. Because of course there is. 6 people have survived an apocalyptic illness, and we see, from the perspective of one, how they're handling it. They burn a man who has the flu alive. Bernie, our point of view character for the story, says they did him a favor and he probably didn't even realize he was being burned. The screaming would indicate otherwise, but whatever. There's not a lot to this one. My thoughts here, the most interesting thing about this story is King fleshed it out, and this is how we got the stand. We're still early enough in the King timeline. I'm not 100% sure if Night Surf falls somewhere on a beam or if it's one of what would probably be very few standalone stories. And the only reason I kind of question that is because The Stand is definitely on a beam, but the details are just different enough between Night Surf and The Stand, like the name of the disease, how it was classified, that I'm not 100% sure. I don't think it's the same virus, which is why I'm not 100% sure it's the same beam. I think somewhere in the story somebody might have called it Captain Trips, which is what it gets called in The Stand, but they also call it other names that are different. The variant number is different than what's in The Stand, and so I'm just not completely sure that it's part of The Stand. I really don't think it is. I think it's just I think it's the spark. I think it's King wrote Night Surf and then was like, how can I make this worse? And then 2020 decided to be like, haha, bet. And we got to deal with what everybody dealt with in 2020, which wasn't The Stand, but could have been. Once we have a little more context for what the beams are that I keep referring to, I'll start tracking which stories belong on which beams for you guys, at least in my opinion. We're not quite there yet, so I'll save you my speculation. Right now, I'll just say if it is on its own beam, there won't be much else on it. It's not that this one is bad, but there's very little to go on about considering everything I'd cover here, and a whole lot more I'll hit on in the Stand episodes, which aren't too far down the road. So let's go ahead and keep on trucking, and we're going to hit the next story. I Am the Doorway. Trigger warnings for this: space exploration, eyes, which seems like a weird one, but you'll get in a minute, body horror, murder, self-harm, and immolation, which is always a fun one. The summary: 5 years after a space flight to Venus that ended with a bad landing that killed his partner and made our main character Arthur wheelchair-bound, he sits talking to his friend Richard on his porch. Arthur is telling Richard that they murdered someone. Arthur's hands are wrapped in bandages because he says he has alien eyes appearing on them, and the aliens get scared when they see Earth. They used Arthur to kill a kid the night before. He tries to take Richard to the body, but they have used Arthur while he was asleep, unconscious, whatever, to move the body, so that now there is no proof. With no other way to prove to Richard that Arthur is telling the truth, he unbandages his hands. He feels the things looking out his hands, become terrified of Richard, and tells him to run. Richard, who has now seen the eyes, does so. But the things take control of Arthur's body and reach out to the clouds, summoning a lightning bolt. Arthur wakes back up on his porch with no evidence of Richard ever coming to visit. Arthur pours gasoline on his hands and sets them ablaze in his fireplace. We do a skip ahead 7 years. Arthur tells us he's adjusted well to the hooks his hands were replaced with. Then he tells us that he is going to have to use those hooks to take his own life because now there is a arrangement of 12, this time golden eyes, on his chest. I'm going to be a buzzkill on most, if not all, alien stories, even ones Stephen King writes. I rarely enjoy extraterrestrial stories. It's just not my genre. If it's yours, that's great. You'll probably enjoy this one. We need to leave space alone, and we need to leave the deep sea alone. That's all I have to say about that. We need to stop touching other people's stuff. We're gonna lose. The human race is gonna lose if we don't quit touching other people's stuff. All I'm gonna say. I have dutifully taken notes with names, locations, and all that good stuff, so we can find where this one belongs in the Kingverse if any of what was in this one comes up in other stories. Next, we're going to talk about the Mangler. Trigger warnings for this one are going to be demons, possession, amputation, and machines coming to life. Officer John Hutton is called out to an incident at the Blue Ribbon Laundry. An ironing and folding machine malfunctioned, pulling in and killing a woman. Except when state inspectors come, they can't find anything wrong with the machine. Roger Martin, one of the state inspectors, tells John about a refrigerator that kept trapping things inside of itself and tells him this laundry machine gives him the same feeling. Next, a steam piece breaks, burning I think it was 6 women, at least one severely enough that she had to be hospitalized. Then, while doing standard upkeep on it, the foreman, George Stanner, gets his arm pulled in when the machine somehow turns on by itself. He is saved by the laundry maintenance man, who cuts off Stanner's arm before the rest of him follows it into the machine after finding that the emergency shutoff and pulling the fuses on the building do not turn off the machine. With the help of his friend Mark, John is able to piece together that the machine is possessed. Mark narrows down what might be possessing the machine, not knowing that the laundry worker who died spilled some meds into the machine, which contained a component that allowed a more powerful demon or entity, whatever you want to call it, than what they were expecting to take the machine over. Mark and John go to the laundry to try to exorcise the demon from the machine. Ill-prepared, since they think they're going up against a much weaker whatever. During the exorcism, the machine rips itself out of the ground, and Mark stumbles as they try to escape. The machine captures him. John escapes and runs to the state inspector's house, where he tells him the machine is trying to get out before fainting. The state inspector picks up the phone to call someone, but hears and smells the machine coming their way and knows it's too late. So, what do I think about this story? I think the chances of Stephen King watching my YouTube channel are probably in the negatives. But just in case, I'm going to address this to him for just a second. Hi, Mr. King. Can I call you Stephen? Steve? Okay, Mr. King. I need to get this one off my chest. You cannot accidentally a demon, not like this, some spell components getting into a machine with zero intent by whoever put them in there. It's washing shit. You put the stuff being in the machine with no intent to summon anything. And then a virgin accidentally cutting her finger and bleeding on the machine will not summon a demon. Or if it does, that's kind of a shit demon. It's definitely not going to be one of the big daddies like we get the idea this one is. I love you. You're one of my literary heroes. This is not how spells work, and I think you know better. Okay, rant over. So, it's a pretty good story. You had me in the first half. I was terrified of this thing. And then it just got silly somewhere around the middle, almost pulled back to scary, and then the industrial laundry machine starts chasing people. If you like B-horror movies, I can see you liking this, but I can't defend it. What I can do is point out a plausible connection to the Kingverse. We don't get the exact town that this Blue Ribbon Laundry is in. It's entirely possible the Blue Ribbon Laundry is a chain and does not have a single location. That said, Carrie's mom, Margaret, works in a Blue Ribbon Laundry. If it's not Margaret White's Blue Ribbon, I'm willing to take a safe bet they belong on the same beam. Only thing kind of decent that's not true. I don't hate it. The accidentally a demon is just gonna mess with me for a little while. Anyway, next we're going to talk about the boogeyman. Trigger warnings for the boogeyman are going to be racism, nyctophobia, monsters in closets, child death, and stalking. Lester Billings comes to Dr. Harper's office to get a story off his chest. Lester had 3 children. Had. All of them are now deceased. Lester tells Dr. Harper that his children were killed by the boogeyman. He explains his 2 older children's death, explains he didn't take Denny seriously about the boogeyman. Then one day they found him dead in his crib and the closet door was open. Just a crack. After he died, they moved Cheryl from the parents' room to Denny's old room. Rita, Lester's wife, didn't like it, but she wasn't very confrontational. Cheryl also died in that room after some time of complaining about the boogeyman. And the closet door was open, but just a crack. After that, Rita got an IUD because Lester told her they should wait to have more children. At this point, he suspects that something is going on. He suspects that there is actually something coming after the children. Either the IUD failed, or Rita had it removed. This is Lester's suspicion, but he's not a very nice guy, so I won't be taking his word for it. And they have Andy. They have Andy at the end of the year following Cheryl's death. Lester tried not to love Andy, but he couldn't help it. Lester had a job again. They moved, and for about a year things were quiet. Then doors would start opening in the house. Just a crack. This time, Lester hadn't let Andy sleep in a separate room. But Rita had to go out of town for an emergency with her mother. Lester and Andy were alone, and the boogeyman got bold, making all the doors in the house fly open at once, scratching things up, leaving trails of slime behind it, just tearing the place apart. And Lester put Andy in a different room, knowing the thing would go after Andy and not him. When Andy starts screaming, Lester runs into the room where he left his son, but does nothing to stop the thing until it had already killed Andy. Lester calls the police the next morning. It looked like Andy had tried to get out of his crib and fallen. All the deaths had looked like unfortunate but natural occurrences. Sid's, I think Cheryl's was, they said she had a fit, which in 70s speak means like a seizure. And then Andy fell out of his crib. At the end of our story, Lester goes to make an appointment with the nurse, but seeing she isn't there, goes back into the therapist's office to try to make one with him, or at least let him know. It's empty, but the closet door is open, and out steps the boogeyman, with a Dr. Harper mask in its hand. My thoughts? This is the good shit. This is what I'm here for. The pacing, the creep factor, the entity stalking the family to the next house, not showing up immediately. It has to find them again. But it's coming. The way you can kind of side-eye Lester because of how he talks about his kids. It makes you almost wonder if there is a boogeyman right up until the end, right until that reveal. If we wanted to dig deeper, there's an argument for the boogeyman being an allegory for abuse or neglect, and it's haunting Lester because it was all avoidable. This isn't necessarily that kind of channel, though it's bound to happen now and again. Also, I know I promised not to get super into the movies and stuff, but they made a movie loosely based on this story this year, and it's totally worth the watch if you've got some time. And I say loosely based because this is like I'm pretty sure less than 10-page story, and what they do with it is fantastic. I'm not going to go into a whole thing. This is not a movie channel. I'm not trying to make it a movie channel. I just went and saw the movie because it said Stephen King. So good. Now we're going to talk about gray matter. Trigger warnings for gray matter are contaminated drinks, infection, mentions of harm to animals and children, and alcoholism. Timmy Grenadine comes into Henry's Night Owl and tells the owner a story. When he's done, Henry grabs two other guys, our unnamed narrator and Bertie Connors, and goes to investigate. On the way, Henry tells them what Timmy told him. A while ago, Timmy's dad, Richie, got a bad beer. Richie had started drinking a lot, and Henry figures he was probably halfway through the bad one before he noticed it had gone off. Richie starts getting sensitive to light to the point Timmy has to go to his friend's house just to do homework. Not just outside light. Timmy can't turn on lights in the house. Then one day, Timmy comes home to find his dad wrapped up in a blanket. They talk, and then his dad reveals himself. It still looks like his father, but crushed up inside a gray gelatinous form. Timmy keeps bringing his dad beer until he looked through a peephole and saw his dad eating a dead cat. Henry confronts Richie through the door to his apartment, finally demanding Richie come out because none of them are going to come in to bring Richie the beer. So Richie bursts through the door of his apartment. Our narrator and Bertie haul ass out of there, and we close on all of them waiting back at Henry's Night Owl to see if it'll be Henry or Richie coming down the road. Thoughts? This one's alright. I certainly wouldn't want to run into Richie Grenadine in a dark alley, but it's not one of those stories that's going to keep me up at night either. Pretty straightforward. Not a lot to speculate on here. I'd say the next few, we don't get the level of detail I'm used to from King for me to be able to play around with where they might be in the universe. So we're just going to keep it moving and head on to Battleground. The only trigger warning I can kind of think of for this is that inanimate objects come to life. King does this several times in this book, but I'm gonna get a little bit of my thought in here. This is arguably the worst time that he does this, at least in this short story collection. Summary. Hitman Johnny Renshaw is hired to assassinate the owner of a toy company, Hans Morris. When he's returning home from the hit, he's told he has received a package. John recognizes the writing on the package as that of Hans Morris's mother because he saw it on a picture in Morris's office. Inside the package is a G.I. Joe Army toy footlocker. This seems innocuous until the box starts shaking. Toy soldiers stream out and begin an all-out assault on Renshaw. Renshaw manages to escape and make it around the building to his balcony. When he tries to get the jump on the toys guarding the box, he discovers this specific set came with a couple of extra items, one of which is a scale-sized thermonuclear weapon which blows him and presumably most of his penthouse apartment to smithereens. I also have very few thoughts on this one. This makes me vaguely want to blame Stephen King for Toy Story, since I'm pretty sure they have a set of tiny army men running around somewhere. King is allowed to write these kinds of monstrosities, and I'm allowed to dislike it. I will give him credit on this one for giving me a plausible explanation for why and how the toys became animated, though. Don't fuck with older spiritual women or the people they care about. Most older spiritual people, but definitely the women. That said, let's keep on trucking. I'm not proud of that, but I said it, so it's staying in. To our next story, trucks. Trigger warnings for trucks. Vehicles coming to life, people getting run over, and people being held hostage. Our summary is a small group of people is trapped in a truck station. Trapped by what, you ask? Well, the trucks. All the 18-wheelers seem to have become sentient. We see our little group lose two people who try to flee, and one when he and our narrator attempt to blow up a bulldozer that attacks the station after the humans refuse to meet the truck's demands to be fueled up. Our narrator finally gives in and goes out to start fueling the trucks. After several hours, the man who had been working the counter comes out to take over. We close as our narrator prepares to wake up the one other living person, the girlfriend of the guy who died trying to destroy the bulldozer, who is still stuck there because it's about to be her turn. My thoughts: I appreciate no explanation for the sudden sentience of the trucks more than a bad explanation. Yes, I'm still kind of complaining about the Mangler. This one creeps me out more than Battleground because I'm pretty sure I could take sentient tiny green army guys. I'm entirely unconvinced I could take a sentient and angry truck. I also kind of wish it was a little longer, just so we could see if the trucks said anything else in Morse code, which is how the humans were informed of what the trucks wanted, by the way. Also, and this is my depression showing a little bit, at least with the army men, they're just gonna kill me. Dying because these trucks don't understand human needs for things like rest or food or potentially heat stroke would take significantly longer. I don't want to live like that. I'll take the... In the scope of things Stephen King has written about that I'm going to try to take, I'll take the army men over the trucks. And number 10. Sometimes they come back. Summary. When he was a child, Jim Norman's brother was murdered in front of him by some asshole teenagers. Jim managed to get away. Now, as an adult, Jim starts working as an English teacher at Harold David High School. Besides some upsetting dreams from that childhood trauma, things seem to be going fine for him. Until one of his students is killed in a hit and run and replaced with a teenager who looks exactly like one of the boys who was there when his brother was murdered years ago. Another student falls from the top of her apartment building to be replaced by another of the boys. Finally, a student Jim wasn't getting along with comes to tell him the two new students are planning to kill him. He wants Jim to know that if they do anything, he was not involved because there'd been some animosity between Jim and this boy. Jim had caught this student cheating on a test and failed him, which was going to prevent the student from playing the next round of sports. So the student had been acting out and kind of hanging out with the creepy teenagers who'd showed up, but not once they started talking about murder. The student goes missing. He either ran away for his safety or got murdered. We'll never know for sure. And he is replaced by another of the boys from all those years ago. Jim comes up with a plan, but not before the boys kill his wife. Jim gets a hold of the leader and tells him to meet him at the school so they can finish things. When the boys arrive, Jim has done a ritual and made a deal with something. The scene plays out just as it did when James was a kid, except that the boys all fall to ash after something that looks like his brother, but definitely is not, is stabbed. On his way out of the school, Jim sees a shadow moving strangely and wonders if his trouble is really over. My thoughts on this one. So you do know how summoning demons works. Okay, I'm done. I'm done bullying the Mangler. But seriously, this one is very good. I think the build-up and pacing is excellent. The unfinished business angle of why the boys who killed his brother have come back from the grave, very good. And the climax where the thing that helped Jim makes it clear it isn't done with him yet. This one goes near the top of the list for me for this first set of stories. And since this is the last one of the episode, here's where we currently are in the rankings. We're just going to do 1 through 10 today, because I haven't even gotten to the other 10 yet. I'm reading this, and it's still going faster than me listening to The Stand. I gotta stop bullying The Stand. I like it. It's so long. It's so long. So, let's wrap ourselves up with my non-King book review. Today, for our non-King story, I'm going to cover No Exit by Taylor Adams. So I got it. I vaguely knew what it was about, and I didn't think I was going to like it that much. I was wrong, and I love to admit when I'm wrong. because that means I actually enjoyed something I didn't think I was going to about 90% of the time. This is another one, kind of like with King. Pacing is fantastic. The surprises actually surprise you, so when you think things start to go one way and then you're wrong, it's good wrong. It's unexpected wrong. It keeps you on your toes. I like being kept on my toes. It's fun for me. Once the situation our main character Darby walks into gets started, though, it never really slows down. We have a couple moments where we think we're kind of here, and then we're not. And then it just keeps getting worse. There's not an off switch. Even the moments where we are like this, they still keep that tension. There's not a ton of like what I would consider unnecessary comic relief or a time when you think, oh, we're okay now. You're waiting for the storm to blow back in because you know it's not done. Also, I kind of said this a while ago, I think in the Shining video. No, I said this for Salem's Lot. So I'm going to kind of reiterate this. I said it for Salem's Lot already. I love an irredeemable antagonist. I don't want your backstory. That's not true. I want your backstory. I don't want a backstory that makes me feel sorry for you in like a major big way. I don't want to poor baby you at the end of this. You are doing something fucked up. And I just want to be able to enjoy when bad things happen to you. Maybe that makes me a little bit of a bad person. Don't really care. Digressions. I don't want to... I've said it before, I don't want to do big spoilers here. The bad guys, girl, who knows, the antagonist, is just bad. Just for me, and I hope for anybody else who reads this story, you don't come out of the other side of this feeling like the antagonist not necessarily had a point, but was in some way like, oh, he was just he's not. They're not. She's not. Somebody's not. The antagonist is not redeemable. The antagonist is not a good person. This is just a whole fucked up situation. And it's great. The only part I don't like is the part I generally don't like in stuff. And I don't like is a strong word. I'm a little sensitive about parents dying, specifically mothers. I have mother issues. I don't know if you can tell by the fact that I'm going to make a whole episode about Stephen King's female protagonists and their mothers. But I have some parental issues that I'm going to use that episode or episodes to deal with. We'll talk about that when the time comes. Anyway, the story is great. I very comfortably recommend No Exit. It is not supernatural, which makes it kind of even weirder that I enjoy it because I don't too much enjoy stuff that could be true crime because I'm always kind of afraid I'm gonna end up reading something and then finding out later, oh, that really happened and somebody adapted it into a story, which I did, fun fact, find out about a different book that I'm not gonna super get into. Maybe. I'm not gonna get into it in this episode. I don't know if I'm gonna review that one. I don't know if I'm just gonna skip over that one. Anyway, No Exit. Recommend if you're looking for more, definitely more thriller than horror on this one, but a very good read. Very, very full of tension, very interesting. lots of good twists. I enjoyed it. If you check it out, I hope you do too. And with that, I think that covers another episode of Macabre Manuscripts. I'll send you all off back out into the spooky October world, and I hope you all have a good time until I see you again. Stay scary.